and welcome to this episode of Higher Dimensions. I want to thank you for joining me. And I want to take a few minutes and just explain in a little more detail the shadow self. The shadow self is a part of us that is the parts of ourselves, of our own emotional nature, personality, even physical makeup, that we have judged and rejected about ourselves, that we have deemed unacceptable, and we try to push out of our consciousness. And it really is a form of internal disintegration where we disown these parts of ourselves. And then oftentimes these parts of ourselves begin to be reflected to us by other people and other situations. And we find ourselves responding to those people or those situations with an emotional charge and a judgment that goes with it. You see, all of us have a need for love and acceptance. All of us have a need to have relationships with people where we can feel and experience those things. And we are born into families, we are born into societies, cultures, and subcultures where certain behaviors or expressions of personality earn us more acceptance and love than others. And so what happens is we create this social self, this persona, if you will, that we try to present when we are in these social situations so that we can get those absolutely necessary and basic needs for love and acceptance met. What becomes a problem for us is when we are in cultures where there are significant parts of ourselves that want expression, that want to find expression, that actually want to find love and acceptance, but they can't find it within the values and the collective mindset and consensus of the families or the cultures or societies that we are a part of. So let me give you two examples. Let me give you an example of a boy who's born, and this boy has by nature in his personality coming from his soul. He is very sensitive. He is very compassionate. He's very easily moved perhaps by suffering or by wrongdoing or injustice, and grows up in a family where giving expression to those emotions is seen as being less than manlike or less than masculine. So, for example, let's say that this boy cries a lot and grows up in a family where he hears the message, real men don't cry, or where he grows up believing that somehow if you have weakness, that makes you less than a man. For a lot of us, maybe we grew up where the boys were supposed to be rough and tumble, the boys were supposed to be good in sports, athletics, that kind of thing. And let's say that this child has trouble performing at an acceptable level, but prefers to do other activities that are on the more emotional and sensitive side of things. And he finds out that when he expresses those things, he gets disapproval and displeasure from his peer group, maybe even from his family, from his church or whatever. And so begins to hide those things, begins to withdraw those things, and begins to feel internally like those parts of himself are not acceptable. And then begins to try to adopt behaviors that may be even contrary to his nature, where he tries to be rough and tough, or he tries to be masculine and physical, maybe even ends up bullying as a result of trying to overcompensate for those things that are inside of him. Now, for the young girl, let's say that she grows up in a Christian family, a very conservative one, where any kind of sexual expression before marriage is deemed as being sinful, evil, and unacceptable in the sight of God. This can actually be more of a struggle for women because there can be a fear in the parents that the young girl is going to get pregnant, because after the sex act, she's the one that's left to deal with the child growing in her body. If she gets pregnant, she gets caught. Everybody else might be doing it, but she gets publicly caught for it. And so then here comes all this public shaming. For those of you that may not know what a purity culture is, if you grew up in any kind of a conservative Christian, evangelical, charismatic community, you know what I'm talking about. And so this young girl begins to, at some point in the early teen years, let's say, become boy crazy and begins to awaken to sexual pleasure and the sexual desire, which is a perfectly natural, normal, biological function for everybody. Sexuality in that case is just as necessary for the propagation of society and survival of the human race as oxygen, as water, and as food. But somehow eating and drinking and breathing aren't seen as wrong, but having those sexual desires and those sexual urges are seen as being unacceptable. So she begins to suppress those, and she begins to adopt the values and the beliefs of the culture and the church around her, and she begins to present herself as this pure person who's waiting until they're married to give away this special gift of her virginity or whatever the case may be. In both cases, the boy and the girl are adopting behaviors, but at the same time having to deny and suppress and even reject parts of themselves. What happens oftentimes is we try to completely disown those parts of ourselves and get away from them, and it creates this sort of dark, hidden, shadowy self that we don't want anybody to see. And when we disintegrate internally, because that's really what's happening, there's a disintegration that's happening, and we disown those parts, then eventually throughout life, we are confronted with people who who for whatever reason, had more freedom and liberty in their life to give expression to those parts of ourselves that we ourselves deny. So in the case of the young man, he grows up believing that he's got to be tough and strong and can't cry and can't show emotion and can't do certain activities. And he sees another young boy or even a young man or adult man throughout his life who expresses this more sensitive side to himself, is more emotional, is more easily affected by things, and more able to express feelings like crying and feelings like sensitivity and compassion. And the boy who didn't allow himself, the man who grew up and didn't allow himself to do those things, will see those things in that other person, and there will oftentimes, almost always, be an emotional charge on it that's very understandable, because this boy worked very hard to suppress those things and learned that they weren't acceptable and internalized the values of the culture around him. And so when he sees that boy expressing those things, oftentimes the emotional charge will be followed up by a judgment that somehow says that is wrong or that is not acceptable. And he will begin to judge, maybe even mistreat, or be suspicious of the young man who's able to express those things. For the girl who grew up in the purity culture, she may see a young woman who, for whatever reason, is in touch with her sexual desires and has the freedom to express those. So she's able to go out and experiment with her sexuality. Maybe she has multiple sexual partners. And the young girl who works so hard to maintain her quote-unquote purity will see that, and that's a mirror expression of the parts of herself that she denied. So there will be an emotional charge, and oftentimes judgments, things like, oh, isn't she a slut? Or, oh, doesn't she know she shouldn't wear skirts that are that short, or whatever the case may be, and begins to treat that person differently. See, it's not approaching it from the standpoint of, wow, I'm really curious, and it's really interesting that she's able to express parts of myself that I myself have chosen to deny or suppress. Instead, it comes out with a lot of negativity and a lot of judgment, and in some cases, even violence. Now, here's the thing. The more of yourself that you have to shave off or hide or withdraw or suppress in order to fit the social construct or the social image that you have created for yourself, the bigger your shadow becomes and the more of a problem it becomes. When a person begins to try to engage God or engage the divine or engage in spirituality and has not done good shadow work, then what happens is that shadow self often gets projected onto God. See, the feelings that I have about myself, that I have, the parts of myself that I hate or that I judge or that I'm angry about, is very easy for me then to project that onto God. Because after all, where did these values come from? See, if you grew up in a religious household, you believe these values came from God. So it's very easy for you to project that side of things over onto God. And when you do that, then you will find yourself resonating with messages. Go to church and hear messages where it's sexual sin is preached against, or you go to men's conferences and you hear this is what a real man is supposed to be like, and you're saying a hearty amen, you're saying a hearty yes, because internally you've already created that structure without realizing that you're suppressing and denying parts of yourself. And that really isn't what the human journey, or really isn't what healthy spirituality looks like. Healthy spirituality and true relationship with God should lead us to love all of ourselves. See, you cannot love in other people what you've already rejected about yourself, because they become a painful mirror to you about your own, showing you your own self-repression. And God kind of built it that way, so that when you could see someone else, you would have a judgment upon it, you would have an emotional charge. That's inviting you to do some exploration inside and say, what is that about? What part of myself is this person mirroring for me that I have judged and rejected within myself? It's actually an invitation. If we could see our judgments, our emotional charges, as coming from the reflection that that person is presenting to us of ourselves, to reveal to us our own lack of wholeness, then we can begin to love those parts that are inside of ourselves. And as we grow, we might even begin to change our own standards, our own beliefs, our own values, and our own morals. We may say, well, we were taught that this was wrong. Our society believes that this is wrong. But there are other parts of our society and other areas and people who don't feel this way, who celebrate this situation or expression. And then we can make a conscious choice whether or not we want to integrate that part of ourselves and allow it to have expression, or whether we want to integrate it into ourselves in another way that can lead us to a greater level of compassion and understanding. Certainly, our projections of our shadow prevent us from getting a clear picture of who God is. And it prevents us even from being able to read sacred writings or scriptures without seeing them through the lens of our own judgments. You know, the great master teacher Jesus himself said, judge not lest you be judged. And it's not so much God judging us because we're judgmental. What it means is that when we're judging others, the reality is the measure that we're judging them with is the measure that comes back to ourselves. The harm that we're doing to them is a reflection of the harm that we've already done to ourselves. And that's why he follows it up and says, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but you don't see the plank in your own eye? See, the reality is if you have a plank in your eye, when you're looking out through that eye, the only thing you see is the plank. And so what you don't realize is that that speck in your brother or sister's eye that you're judging is actually there to show you the plank that is in your own eye. And the only way to remove the plank in your own eye is to learn to love and accept fully the parts of yourselves that you don't like, the parts of yourself that you've judged. And this can be an incredibly liberating time when you begin to tap into your authentic self and you begin to tap into your real power, where you're not being controlled by the judgments of the family or the society that you became a part of, but where you can begin to wake up and notice those parts about yourself and love those parts, and if you choose, even give expression to those parts, even if it doesn't fit with the society that you're a part of. In that sense, when you love your shadow and you own your shadow, you're taking back your power. You're taking back your free will. So I want to encourage you to find some ways to do some shadow work, if you will. If you want to comment in the comments below, if you've enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe. I'm just getting started in this vlogosphere world doing these. I'd love to have you subscribe. I'd love to have you comment with your questions, good, your comments, good or bad, and maybe we can start having a dialogue about some of these things, because it's part of my life's mission and part of my deepest desire to help people find wholeness within themselves, because it's only once you find that wholeness within yourself that you can truly be at peace and can truly begin to find happiness and really, truly begin to find the love and acceptance, even within community and society, that you're looking for and working towards. I hope this explanation of the shadow self has helped you. I hope it's made sense. I want to thank you so much for watching, and whatever time it is there for you as you're watching this, whether it's morning, afternoon, evening, or night, I hope it's good, and I want to thank you again.